So this is a revisit of the first section of An Inspector Calls, which I've referred to here as the celebration, basically going from the very beginning of the play up until the entrance of the inspector. It's not dealing with the characters individually, that will be dealt with elsewhere. This is more just some of the ideas within the section, so thinking of it more kind of structurally. Now, obviously this section is very much about exposition. It is about setting up character and situation, Priestley making sure that as an audience, when we come into the theatre, we are immediately drawn into the key ideas and themes that he wants us to be. So we're going to start with the stage directions. Now, there's a varied approach here. Some are stage directions for the setting in front of us, so directly affecting the audience, but some of them are stage directions for actors, and therefore not things that we would actively see to begin with. They're only things that we would hopefully note. So I'm going to suggest to you here that you be very careful when you're discussing stage directions, in realising that this is something that we are going to see, and therefore, and the same with the setting as well, referring to it as things we see or referring to it as things that Priestley makes clear to the actors. So the stage directions generally at the beginning, I basically the opening setting that we're going to see, where we, the curtain in a conventional production, the curtain comes back, if we see exactly what's been set out by Priestley, I would suggest to you that one of the key things we're getting is a demonstration of the superficiality of the lives that we're about to witness. Okay? Let me show you what I mean. Okay, so I'm going to use particular quotations here, or particular extracts from the play. These are not here intended for you to learn and memorise. That's not necessarily going to help you at all. Just looking over these again and again will get this idea clear in your head. Remember, you can just make references to these things happening. But if I've underlined and placed in bold any particular words, then I'm suggesting to you they are ones that could be directly commented on, okay, more effectively. Okay, so let's start here at the beginning. Right, one of the first things we're told is about the furniture. And what I would say here is look at this in effect as Arthur decorating his house, okay? I suppose he would be, wouldn't he? He would be the one who decorated his house. It's his house, he's the patriarch of the family. And this kind of sums him up. The furniture that he chooses is good and solid, it's substantial, heavily comfortable. So it basically does what it should do, but it's there, it's what people would buy in that class and that situation. But the key phrase is the end bit here. It's not cosy and home-like. He seems unable to find that kind of homely feel to his home. It's impressive, but it's not a home. So right from the beginning, we should get that feeling that this is not somewhere where people, where the characters, even those who live there, are actually particularly at home. Many people comment on this. The lighting should be pink and intimate, and the fact that it changes when the inspector comes in. You get this standard phrase which you hear from everybody of rose-tinted glasses, which is, yeah, fair enough, that's okay. I think, to me, what's more interesting is the comparison between that lighting and the point we've just had about the furniture. It's not cosy and home-like, but the lighting is pink and intimate, as though this is not a homely thing, but there's a sense that they are locked into what's going on in their world at that particular moment. But I would also pay attention to this. There's the setup of the dining table in the middle is very clear. It's said very obviously who sits where. And that, again, is something we should be aware of as an audience. If you take this as a standard staging with the kind of like proscenium arch theatre that you have in most places and certainly would have been dominant in 1945, Eric is described as downstage, seated downstage. And that means Eric has his back to us, which, along with the details about Eric in a minute, we can see is a way of kind of keeping that air of mystery about him right from the beginning. He's not the person. He's the person we would pay least attention to of the family and of the people on stage. Now we get to the description of each one of them here. Remember, as I said, this is for a director or an actor or whatever for the casting or for the idea. We hopefully would notice some of these things by their physical appearance, but and things as they go along. We'd notice, for example, Arthur's speech, which is very, very important because it would immediately stand out that Arthur has an accent and nobody else does. Everybody else would speak in kind of received pronunciation. The Queen's English, Standard English, whatever you like to call it, but Arthur still has an accent and a provincial way of speaking. This, I suppose, is intended to alert us to the idea that this is a self-made man. This is somebody who comes from a kind of probably working class background and has made his way up to this standard, therefore immediately identifying him as the kind of archetypal capitalist of the time, doing exactly what capitalism claims it can do. And of course, Priestley doesn't believe in the idea that if you work, you can pull your way up from the lowest ranks. So I think we're going to see that. But it's important he's described as portentous. Essentially, think of it as serious. He doesn't have a sense of humour. He seems to take everything very, very seriously. That's something we should see very clearly. Also, the fact that he's in his middle 50s, which kind of then goes with his wife, who is about 50. This is set, of course, we know in 1912. So we're talking about them being born late 1850s, early 1860s, both of them. That makes them very, very squarely Victorian. And that's definitely something that should come across through the play. That both of them belong to another era. This is the Edwardian era. Things have progressed a bit here. Even though we are looking back, and this you must remember is a historical play, even though we're looking back at it, they are very much belonging to an older time. Okay, so if Arthur is the archetypal capitalist from that description, his wife is kind of the archetypal upper middle class woman, or should we say Victorian bourgeois woman, the three things that define her. And describing her as cold is quite significant here. Yeah, she's her husband's social superior. You can work that out. That goes with what we were saying about Arthur before. But cold. Now, my suggestion here is, that should come across to us in the acting, but my suggestion here is that he seems to be presenting her as a product of her environment. Somebody whom the warmth, the emotion, whatever, has been sucked out of. And it's conjecture, but I would suggest that is to do with her background. Sheila then is described, the adjective used about her is pretty, a very significant adjective, because of course that is the same adjective that every single character uses about Eva, and therefore creates that connection between them. Remember, Eva and Sheila, same age pretty much, both described as pretty, and both of course connected to Gerald, and therefore can be seen as almost, I wouldn't go as far as doppelgangers, but certainly two sides of the same coin. Like Sheila is Eva with privilege, and Eva is Sheila without privilege. It's worth noting she's very pleased with life. People love to talk about her immaturity at the beginning. I'd question that, as we'll see in a minute, but it certainly does seem to me that she is not considering at the moment the depths of life. Then we get Gerald, a lot of detail about him. That strange phrase, rather too manly to be a dandy. I don't think that's going to bother us as much at this point. I would notice the point that he's well bred is essentially identifying to us that he is pretty much upper class, as we find out later. He's certainly a class above the people on stage, the other people on stage. But this phrase "man about town" a socialite, somebody who likes to be out and spreading. Of course, we're going to find out how significant that is in a minute. And then, of course, Eric. Poor old Eric. Well, maybe not poor when we find out what happens to him. Not quite at ease, half shy, half assertive. From the beginning, with his back to us, there is this sense that he doesn't belong, that he's between two worlds, between two personalities. Obviously, a result of the alcohol. So, this is before anything starts, we're aware of this. Now, there's a number of things that would come up in discussing other individual characters, but I'm just going to take a few set particular moments that are worth revising and worth knowing as moments. And I'm going to start with the on the second page, pretty much of it. So within the first few, first minute or so of the play, Gerald and Sheila, and this question here that right from the first time we see them interact, are we shown an undercurrent of tension between them? Again, people like to go for this simplistic reading of it that, Gerald and Sheila very much in love at the beginning and not at the end. The inspector comes in and everything changes. Well, I don't think it does. Look at this exchange closely. First of all, Gerald talks about wanting to be treated like a member of the family and uses this phrase, "I've been trying long enough, haven't I?" And he directs that at Sheila. Now, already there's an undercurrent there, isn't it? I mean, why would you say that? Well, I've been trying long enough, haven't I? Almost sounds like a dig to begin with. And of course, then she doesn't reply, so he repeats with more insistence. Now, this immediately, first of all, factually, I've been trying long enough. Does it suggest he's been proposing a number of times and she hasn't accepted? Does it suggest that he feels that they've been together long enough before they've got engaged? Whatever it is, there's a little edge to it. And the very fact that she doesn't reply to him at first, she ignores him at the dinner table, at their engagement party, basically, engagement dinner party. I think straight away we see that there is some issue here. And of course it is to do with what happened last summer. And Sheila will bring up later that she pretty much knew that he's having an affair. So at this point she suspects he's having an affair. I'm pretty convinced of it. But maybe the difference at this point is how she deals with it. Half serious and half playful. Is this the role that she's in at this point? She has a serious point about it, but she seems to only feel she can make it by being half playful about what she's saying when she's talking to him about it. Certainly later on when it comes up, she's fully serious. Maybe this shows you how her role changes a little bit. And then, of course, we get the interruption of Mrs. Burling, Sybil Burling, her mother, who butts in, trying to make sure that maybe she does read that there's an undercurrent of tension there, maybe she doesn't, but she butts in, trying to smooth things over and go past Sheila's thing about Gerald not coming near her. And this is our first introduction here to the issue of women, you see, in the play. We have Sheila here, who is showing a bit of strength and guts to herself. If you look at what she says next, I mean, she says in response to being told that she's got to deal with this, "I don't believe I will." Sheila is showing an edge, a bit of strength to herself already in one of our first times we really get to hear her. But Mrs. Burling, Sybil, who belongs, as we said, to an older era, a Victorian era, sees that men with important work to do just have to be left to get on with it. So she attaches the idea of men with important work. And we'll see this several times throughout the play. But we're seeing this old idea that basically women are there just to support the men in their important work. And we see Sheila come out against that. "I don't believe I will." So these little exchanges, an undercurrent of tension, a little hint towards Sheila having something more about her at the beginning. Immature? I don't see it in this extract. Yet, a few pages later, he presents her with the ring and we see something very different. Is it genuine feeling? Well, we get this bit where she says, I can't drink to myself when they're all drinking to her, and Gerald says, you can drink to me, and she goes, all right, I'll drink to you, very seriously, and they look at each other. And, you can read it a number of ways, but it does appear to be a loving moment between them. So if we take what's just happened as being her feeling awkward towards him or feeling annoyed about this situation, there does seem to be, it doesn't seem to just be what Arthur thinks it is, a set-up marriage. It seems to have some genuine feeling. So, but then of course Priestley gives us that line again that we'll all remember, is it the one you wanted me to have about the ring, which again comes back to those gender roles, him deciding on the ring rather than her saying the one, I wanted, and her accepting that. And then she turns around to show it off, but she shows it off to her mother straight away. Now, is that just her being materialistic, as people like to suggest? Or is it particularly aimed at her mother? Is she going back into that role that her mother had, that was saying before, let me show off my ring to you? Possibly. But of course, Sybil, as always, we see, is Sybil. And patronises her, just like she did with the "you'll just have to get used to this," telling her early 20s daughter how to behave. Be careful with it. I always imagine Sheila thinking, oh, all right then, I was going to just, throw it in the bin, but I'll be careful now you've said it. But we get again the role of Sybil in this, the way she looks down at Sheila, but we get a slightly different sense between the two of them. Always good to see more complexity in the relationship. That's how it's set up at the beginning. Finally, of course, she comes up, Sybil, with her compliment to Gerald as well. That was clever of you. Again, another example of her deciding whether things are right or wrong, as we see all the way through the beginning bit here. So the exchange of the ring sets up this idea, sets up Sybil, most definitely, but it's part of the thing with the previous thing about the summer, setting up a relationship that we aren't surprised, shall we say, when it collapses pretty soon. Okay, now, what about Arthur? He dominates this early part, totally. He's the first person to speak in the play, which means we'll notice it. Obviously, he'll stand out because of his accent. He's invited to give a toast, and Priestley uses it to make his priorities clear to us. His toast, the engagement means a lot to him. That's what he wants to say. Okay? You might say that's being a bit picky, but I think when you look at with the other evidence, you can see what he means. That tactless phrase, you're just the kind of son-in-law I always wanted. I know he says son-in-law, but still he is saying that in front of Eric. And there is especially with the way he treats Eric, there is a bit of a knock going on there, really. His focus is totally on Gerald there, but then it becomes totally on business. And the reason he seems to want this son-in-law, and the reason this engagement means a lot to him, apparently, is for the business opportunities. And people have talked before about the way he seems to want the two to come together and work there. But I'd noticed this bit first of all. He wants them to work together for lower costs and higher prices. I always come back to this phrase, and you see I've underlined it as one to remember here. I come back to this phrase so often because this, to me, is Priestley showing you what he thinks of capitalism. Okay? This is a capitalist idea. We're working for lower costs and higher prices. But the way he's phrased it makes it absolutely straightforward that what he is doing, what Arthur is doing, is trying to pay lower wages, pay less to his employees, and take more money off his customers. In other words, exploiting everybody for his own benefit. And that is how Priestley wants it presented to us. And it's very important that Gerald immediately not only agrees, but shouts out, "Hear, hear." Gerald, whatever complexity you might try and find with him later, or more to the point, Priestley tries to find with him later, Gerald agrees with everything that Arthur says at this point. Okay. Move from the toast to then the lecture that he goes off into when he addresses everybody at length about the future and how it's going to be such a good time. Now, obviously, this then takes us from seeing his priorities as being misguided, seeing a critique of capitalism, to then say, okay, and here's your archetypal capitalist who feels this way and he's a self-important fool. I think that's pretty clearly what Priestley's trying to do, and trying to annoy the audience and make the audience angry with him. Now, this is where people get obsessed with the Titanic. I don't know why. It's whatever the obsession with the Titanic is anyway. And they use it as evidence of this. Yes, it's fine, it's there, whatever. But it's so ubiquitous. I mean, literally, I would say almost 80% of any kind of response I read about Inspector Calls in the exams mentions the Titanic. It's also not the best example. Okay, we'll start with him as a hard-headed businessman. That comes up very well. Again, yeah, people like to go to the idea of hard-headed, stiffness. I think he sees that as a positive. We maybe see it as a negative. Yeah, that he doesn't let other ideas in. Okay, but of course, once again, has to take risks and know what he's about. He's very self-important. But then, here's a much more interesting thing. Why is it going to be a time of prosperity and a good time to get married? Because the employers are coming together to protect our interests. So, again, following on from the lower cost time prices, it is all about the employers making more money, the interests of capital as opposed to the interests of other people. Priestley really, really wants to drive this home. And then, far more helpful than any Titanic quote, the Germans don't want war, nobody wants war, would be far more significant to the audience, wouldn't it? Remember, the audience he is writing this for have just emerged from the Second World War. They would have had parents in the First World War. The whole of the last 30 years or so would have been characterised, 30 plus years would have been characterised by war. And, you know, to see someone just before that with privilege and everything just sitting there, sticking his head into the ground, refusing to listen to anybody else, other ideas, saying he knows best, would create anger potentially in the audience. Someone saying, nobody wants war, the Germans don't want war, when you have family relatives who are dead and you've not really processed it. It's hard hitting. Having shown up himself to be a fool, it's very important by this time we see him as a self-important fool who cares only about himself and business. When he then starts to butter up Gerald, when the two of them are left alone, we're seeing it through those goggles. Okay? We're seeing that there must be a personal reason for this. And he does it in an oafish way that suggests he's definitely out of his depth when he's trying to do this. Okay, first of all, another one of my favourite little details. Berling lights a cigar. He offers it to Gerald. Gerald refuses it and lights a cigarette. Cigar, think of them, big, showy. Gerald, small, more subtle, more understated, a cigarette. And there's your wealth for you. Berling flaunts it. Gerald takes it and deals with it subtly. We're seeing a difference already between those who've come into money and those who've got it before. Okay? Berling doesn't really fit in. Then when he starts talking about how Gerald's parents clearly are not there because they don't really approve of the marriage because of the social situation, he is a bit too open about it and embarrasses Gerald. Okay? Again, doesn't know how to deal with the situation. And when he sees him embarrassed, he comes back in with, no, she comes, he excuses her, saying that it's only natural. And again, look at the underlying things here, the bits that are worth remembering. To him, it's it's a perfect example of somebody who moves class and then tries to assimilate alongside them and reject anything from the past. Only natural that somebody who's a landed person from an old country family should feel that way. No, it isn't. It's horrific and it's insulting to him. But no, this is how he wants to see it. And of course he goes into his knighthood then from that point. And then that leads us into the final bit, building up to the inspector coming in. Priestley used this to build up these sentiments, the inspector will break. But Priestley doesn't do much in terms of subtlety. It's okay, here comes the inspector, so as he comes in, I really want to hammer home the things that the rest of the play is going to break down. His attitude towards women, which Gerald agrees with, and so does Eric to this point. The attempt to actually try and, I suppose this is the Arthur form of feminism, isn't it here? Well, it's not just something to wear, it's a sign or token of their self-respect. But of course it's pretty dismissing. Not only to make him look prettier, but a sign or token of self-respect. Then the very well-known line, but a terrific one as well. Man has to make his own way, has to look after himself. But then the added bit afterwards, and his family too, of course, as though he's then thinking about that afterwards. You've got to make your own way in life. You've got to look after yourself. Oh, and your family too, of course. And there's his priorities again. Another example that is misused by a lot of people in the same situation, where he tries to now present the opposite to this, to looking after yourself and your family, of course, is the socialist view. Community and all that nonsense being mixed up together, as he using a simile like bees in a hive. Now, there's a number of people who come up with some strange thing about that, making him the queen bee. That doesn't make any sense. It's a misreading of it. He's criticising this idea. He's suggesting that socialism sees things like bees in a hive, because, as you know, bees in a hive work for each other. They take on their roles. They do exactly what they should do. Having said that, that idea is that they work together as a community, but it isn't necessarily that socialist. It is that idea of people having their own roles, workers who don't reproduce, they do their thing in here. So there is a slight element of irony to this, maybe. That it's almost like the way he wants things to work. But you could also suggest that people working together in a community of bees actually do succeed. And that could also be something you look at. So we can see that build-up of ideas about gender, of ideas about selfishness, of ideas about capitalism and socialism, that the inspector literally walks in the middle of and breaks down. So in the next section, the inspector enters, and Arthur somehow manages to make himself sound even worse. This section then, I feel, is a very, very good place that we've just looked at to begin many answers with, because if you're answering about any character, they are established at this point. If you're talking about any big idea behind it, it's addressed at this point. So definitely a section worth looking at, and those, I think, are the key moments in it.